My name is Stephen Maude. I work in the Researcher Experience team of Bennett Institute. I'm going to be talking about work the team has done. And is that the right slide? Let's see. Yes. I'm going to be talking about how we've made it easier and quicker for researchers to start working on like OpenSAFELY code. And what does it mean by them if you don't know anything about this? What does it mean? It's like on, I can't tell which slide this is on. This is the slide. Should be a picture of a laptop.
Yep, you're good.
Excellent, thank you. What that is a laptop. This is the kind of thing a researcher would be working on, a laptop or a desktop or some kind of computer. And as Ben said in his opening remarks, researchers are working on their own computer. They're not working directly with the data until it's run on the OpenSAFELY platform. They do all their local development locally on their own machine. They're working on things, as Dave just talked about, Urkel, and I'm not going to test you again on the Urkel abbreviation. They're working on their Urkel queries. Once they've used Urkel to extract some of that data, they will then go off and probably do some statistical analysis on that data, looking at something like using Stata or R or Python to do some analysis, get a chart or a table or some other statistical output from that. And what they need to do that is some kind of way of getting that code to work on that code. They need some way of working on that. We don't actually provide a single installation package where we can point someone to and say, this is the thing to download and you will have everything you need. We let people use whichever operating system they want to use, whether that's Windows, Mac, or Linux. They need multiple components to actually start working on that code as well, which means it's a little bit more intricate in getting all those components working together. What do they need? They need something like Visual Studio Code or some other development environment, code editor, RStudio, Jupyter, something like that. They need something like the OpenSAFELY command line tool. This lets people run their project, their OpenSAFELY project, on their own machine in the same way as it runs on the secure platform. That, in turn, uses a Python programming language to run, so they need that installed. They also need a thing called Docker, and Docker is a software component that lets you run code in different places on different computing environments in the same kind of way, and that's some of the magic behind how the platform and the local development environment work in the same way. And researchers are also pushing their code to GitHub, which I forgot to mention in the previous slides. Researchers are backing up their code on GitHub. They can collaborate on their code on GitHub. And when their code is ready to be run on the secure platform, they can then go off and choose to run that code from GitHub on the secure platform. So these are several components that people need to actually start working on their project. There are a few things they need to install. If they're working in a big organization, they probably need help from their IT staff to get approval for installing these different pieces of software. They also probably need to get the IT staff to come and actually install that software because they probably don't have the local administrative rights on their own laptop to do that. So we talked before about there maybe being a single installer, and maybe that would help things somewhat by reducing the number of components people need to install. But we could go a step further and have no installation on a researcher's laptop at all. And if you saw the title of my talk and you know anything about GitHub Codespaces, you may see where this talk is going, and you may have a light bulb and see that this is a solution to the problem. If not, you may tell by my tone of voice and by the story arc of these slides that this is where it's going and this is a solution to the problem. So we'll talk about GitHub Codespaces. This is the blurb that GitHub shows, which says, as secure development made simple. They provide, in their words, fully configured, secure cloud development environments for people to work in. What does that mean to everyone? What it means, if I explain very quickly, is that we have, in this case, a browser tab. I'm running this in my web browser. There is a code editor there, which is Visual Studio Code, if you've never used that before. And this is not in itself too exciting. You might think, well, I write text all the time in a web browser. I'm writing emails, I'm writing documents, I'm filling in forms. How is this different? The different part is that not only is there a code editor inside my web browser, but there's also a server on GitHub's end, which is part of this code space. So it's not just the code editor in the browser, but there's also another server. And that other server can run commands that we give it. And when we type those commands in, and it's in the bottom right-hand side, it's a little bit small, but I'll show that in a minute. You can run commands in there, and they run as if they're running on your own machine. You see the output just as if they're running on your own machine, except it's happening on a machine somewhere maybe thousands of miles away and coming back to you. This is really nice because we don't need to install any of this software ourselves. As GitHub say, it's fully configured, so we can configure all this stuff as part of OpenSAFELY, provide all the software that people need, and package all that up for them. So to go back a step and show how this will work end to end, here's a really toy example. This is a GitHub repository which contains code that I created from a research template that we provide to researchers. It's just a stock template, a starting point for them to work on their projects. There is a code button in the top right corner. If I press that, there is an option that drops down which gives me the option to create a new code space. And from that, we get back to that screen I just previously showed, which is this web code editor running inside my browser. The thing that's outlined is the file explorer, which is a bit like Windows Explorer or the Mac Finder if you've used any of these things before, on the left-hand side, which has all the files that are in the repository, a copy of those files. In the bottom right, we have the terminal that I just talked about, which is where we can run commands. And in the top right, we have an editor window, which doesn't have anything in it right now, but if we open something, by magic, it appears, and we have an Urkel query, something like Dave was just talking about. Mine is a little bit simpler than Dave's. It's the one from a research template that you start with, which is pulling patients out who are registered at a practice on a specific date, and like 1 or 2 variables from that data. What we also get, I should have mentioned, we get nice syntax highlighting from this. So everything is in nice, pretty colors to show the different parts of the Urkel query, which helps you figure out by eye which parts are which. We can also hover on certain words in that query, and we get information that's from the documentation, which saves you going backwards and forwards between the documentation website and into this code environment to figure out what you're trying to do. To help you as well, we also have like an auto-completion function, which tries to fill in. You start typing your code, and you get a prompt which gives you some suggestions for what you might want to put in there. In this case, I'm adding a simple age variable. Now, in the bottom right, the text is small, but it's just to give you an idea, like it's more understanding the idea rather than worrying too much about all the fine text in there. I'm running the OpenSAFELY run command, which is running the project, the entire project, my simple little Urkel code there. There is some mention in the logs there about Docker, so Docker is installed, the OpenSAFELY tool is installed, we've got a code editor, just to go back to some of the things we need. And when we finish, we get a data set. Again, this is dummy data. Nothing I'm showing is real data. This is all dummy data. This is all inside GitHub's Codespace that I'm working in. From there, we want to maybe do some analysis on our data, and we can launch the RStudio server, which is already running. We already provide this as part of the Codespace. So next to the terminal in the bottom right-hand corner, there is an option which says ports, which might be a bit baffling if you're not familiar with the kind of more technical terminology, but it means there's a server running. The RStudio server is running somewhere on GitHub server. We can connect to that by clicking the link. We get RStudio server appearing. The file explorer in the bottom right-hand side is showing the same files that are in my code space. So because the same files are in there, I can open up my data set that I've just created, load it in as a table. I personally don't know too much about R, so maybe I prefer to actually do things in Jupyter. That's not running by default. You need to type in the OpenSAFELY Jupyter command, but the same thing happens in the bottom right-hand side. You get next to the terminal, you get the ports, you get a link to open Jupyter, and then we can open Jupyter up. I know a little bit more, so you can see my attempt at doing some extensive statistical analysis of this very complicated histogram, loading the data in, creating a histogram. That goes back into the code space. It's all the same environment, the same files are in there. And to mention something else, we're working in RStudio and we're working in Jupyter in these different environments. Now, when we're working with OpenSAFELY Run, that runs everything as if it's running on the platform and has the same libraries, the same statistical packages that you have on the platform. In the code space, we've also installed all those same packages into the environment more generally. So whether you're using Python or R or the OpenSAFELY command, all those things should be the same as on the platform, which I know has bitten some people in the past before when they've been trying to run things locally and then on the platform. Yeah, that's more packages. And here on the left-hand side, there is an option to push your code to GitHub, create checkpoints of your code, submit that code to GitHub. There is a distinction here that the code space is more like a temporary environment for doing your work, and the GitHub repository, which we started the actual code space from, is the canonical form of your work as it is. We would recommend you're pushing your code regularly, creating those checkpoints regularly, both to back up your work, and then if you need to collaborate with people, they have access to those changes as well. So hopefully I've shown that we've got all those things in there. I talked about new projects. What do you do if you have an existing project and you want to add this to your project? You don't have to. So if you're happy working the way you're already happy working, that's fine. If not, and you want to try this out, go ahead. There is a dev container folder in that repository which makes it work. That's probably too much detail. We have some guidance on actually how to do that. So on the documentation, you can go and find that, and there's a link to that later on. We've had some internal user feedback from some early testing we did as we were developing this feature, ranging from it works and it seems to do everything that I need to I am way less frustrated at this than my previous setup, which is really nice. So hopefully some of you are excited to try this. We'd love to get feedback from you and we'd love to see what you can do with this. There are 2 workshops tomorrow. My colleagues John Massey and Peter Inglesby are running workshops. One of those is on Urkel that Peter is running, and one is on creating an OpenSAFELY study that John is running. All that stuff is using GitHub Codespaces. You can try that out there. If you're not around tomorrow, then you can try this yourself. If you go on the OpenSAFELY website and go to the tutorial, that all uses Codespaces as well. You don't need OpenSAFELY approval to try this out. You can just have a free GitHub account, and that's all you need. And finally, I should just mention people who have been involved with this work. So primarily, it's been the researcher experience team at Bennett Institute. Somewhere, Lucy Bridges, who's the team lead, is in here somewhere, and I can't see Lucy, but she is around here somewhere. Tom Palmer at the University of Bristol is an OpenSAFELY user who's gave us a lot of fantastic feedback and guidance on the R Studio and the R side of things, which has been great. And Tom is now working a little bit on the OpenSAFELY platform and helping develop it, which is fantastic. And myself and Ian and Simon, who's sat at the front, did a little bit of work on a thing called Gitpod before this, which was a little bit of a precursor to actually feeding into doing all this work on Codespaces. And that's me done. Thank you.